Hi people, welcome back to my YouTube. It's your girl Honey. Welcome back people, welcome back, and those of you who are new here, welcome to my channel. Today we are talking all about Saturn in the first house, Saturn in Aries, Saturn transit the first house, Saturn returning in the first house. Saturn is your rules, regulations, restrictions, responsibilities, limitations, fear, authoritative figures, and it can also be the authority within you. And the first house is an association with your physical appearance, your body, your outlook on life. It's your ascendant. Whenever I see Saturn placed in the first house, my first initial impression is, wow. I always feel like this person is very heavily influenced by people who are in some sort of place of authority. And bearing in mind, authoritative figures can be parents, it can be teachers, it can be the law, any legal issues, it could be anything, but especially when it's very close towards the ascendant. Those of you who have Saturn at around 3 degrees above the ascendant will also relate a lot to what I'm saying. And it just feels very heavy. I feel like I'm being watched all the flipping time. And what we find is that authoritative figures have had a contributing factor to how you look at life. Now, I'm from the Saturn, Neptune and Uranus in Capricorn generation. And a lot of the time, we all have those 3 planets in the same house. Bearing in mind that those placements may differ, the expression of Saturn being here. For example, an ex-boyfriend of mine who happens to be Capricorn rising with Saturn conjunct his ascendant, Neptune and Uranus all conjunct his ascendant. He has always been held underneath some sort of authority. There's always been a very strict parent or a very strict authoritative figure, or always felt that he's under the eyes of the law. There's always been something that has stopped him. He's had to do a lot of learning about the sense of self for him to understand more about his journey through life, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. But Uranus in the first house, because Uranus and Saturn, 2 completely different signs. Uranus is about freedom and liberation. So when you have Uranus and Saturn placed in the first house, he's got to learn that freedom and liberation, which is in terms of the Uranus, alongside the Saturn, which is restrictions and rules. He's got to learn to find freedom in the same rules that he has to learn to adhere to. And a lot of the times, depending on the rest of the chart, if you're going to go full throttle, being rebellious and, looking for freedom and liberation in every aspect of life, that's where we see the restriction of Saturn coming down on you hard. And those of you who have Saturn conjunct Jupiter, the same thing applies here. Jupiter likes to overindulge in life and have lots of fun and be very free to explore itself, whereas Saturn is like, no, you can't be very free. You can be free, but you've got to do your house chores first. Do you get what I mean? Like it's that sort of restriction that Saturn has on top of Jupiter, but there's a lot more having to work towards the freedom. So please bear that in mind. This is really important to learn a lot more about your sense of self based on what aspects you have in your first house and also aspecting Saturn as well. What we find is that there have been a lot of restrictions towards your sense of self growing up, and usually this is influenced by an adult, a teacher, or an authoritative figure. And because there has been someone literally holding you by the neck and telling you how to maneuver in life, it takes away from knowing who you are. The ascendant is one of the most important points in our charts. And if Saturn is right there in the first house on the ascendant, this means that there is a journey that you're on to understand self-awareness. The same way for those people who have Saturn placed in Aries. The Saturn in Aries generation, especially you guys, man. You guys, which is the 96th generation. You guys have Saturn placed in Aries. You've got Jupiter in Capricorn. You've got Chiron and North Node in Libra. And especially if you've got some sort of Cancer energy squaring and opposing, all in cardinal signs, you guys especially are dealing with a lot. Because Saturn has a really hard time being in Aries. It struggles here because Aries is about my sense of self, my personal achievements, my expression. Whereas Saturn is rules, regulations, restrictions, long-term goals, you know? And Saturn is seen as the granddaddy, whereas Aries is linked to the baby. So what we find is Saturn is always trying to police or govern the expression of Aries, the personal achievements of Aries. Having Saturn placed here, right, we're always seeing someone who's constantly on a journey to figure out who they are. And there will be a lot of trials, tribulations along the way. And what you'll always hear is these people say things like, I'm working on being a better version of me. I'm working on me, I'm working on it, I'm working on it. You'll always hear them say that because the journey never ever ends. It's a long-term journey. Now let's just start from the beginning. Because the first house is linked to being a very small child, especially, 0 years old, right? The first 12 months of your life. There's usually something that you would have experienced that made you very, very frightened. And I'm not sure if you guys have seen this whole thing with these pandemic babies online. My nephew is a pandemic baby and he's got Saturn placed in his first house, right? One of my nephews anyway. We wasn't able to socialize with him as much as we'd like to, and he wasn't able to socialize going to nursery and going to different people's homes and socializing. But also those who have it anyway. Growing up, there may have been something that contributed to a fear that you have of the outside world, of people, which would make you psychologically now as an adult a little bit fearful of your own personal potential, which I will come back to in a moment. But this is the thing, Saturn being here can make you very clingy to your parents because they are the two pieces of authority that you know. So if you're familiar with them, why should I be sociable with everybody else when I know my parents? And it can make you a very unapproachable child. A child who doesn't smile a lot, a child who doesn't want to be touched or held. Some kids are just like, grab me. Like, when they're just so sociable. Yeah, when Saturn comes into the first house, they're just not like that. And it can take time and time to warm up, for them to warm up to you. And you have to be very patient with these kids because they're clearly carrying a lot of energy. And even as you get older, specifically when you turn 12 years old, right? There is a lot more pressure that is placed upon you as a child. There might be a lot more responsibility that you've been given, told to look after your siblings or told to pick this up from the shop or do more housework and chores. And it can just feel like there is a lot of pressure from my parents, from adults who have these high expectations of me to achieve. And sometimes it can just feel like physically it feels heavy. And it can be very overbearing for the body because you're taking on board so much so young. And even in terms of especially those who have Saturn conjunct the ascendant. Well, to be fair, I've seen it in the first house period, but especially when it's very close to the ascendant, we're seeing somebody who may have taken a very long time to be born. My nephew took, I think 24 hours, a whole day. His mum was in labour for a whole day. But what we find is that the baby, Saturn placed in the first house people, you guys were afraid because there's so much pressure in the world. So being born again, it's like coming back into the world. I'm not sure if I want the responsibility again. I'm just a bit afraid. So the birth takes a long flipping time. A lot of people with Saturn placed here can have a lot of personal fears. It's like, I want people to take me seriously, I want to be a professional, I want to, put myself out there to achieve. But you're also afraid to put yourself out there, how people recognize you. Like I was saying again, my ex-boyfriend, right? And he was a Leo stellium, so this is this is straight imagery. But he hated not looking good. He hated not looking good. And he hated when people questioned why he would choose to wear this or wear that, or why he would behave a certain way. He cared so much about how he was represented that if someone didn't like him, it was like the worst thing in the world. And Leos like to be liked. It was like that But when Saturn sits here, it wants people to look at them as though they have gone through the dirt, they've gone through lots of obstacles, trials, tribulations, and they've come through, but they're still standing, they're strong. And this is where we go back to, you know, Saturn being here, Saturn being in Aries, you know, learning so much more about who you are, you know, not based on how other people want you to be, but knowing more about who you are and why you are how you are. One of the things that I noticed about Saturn being in Aries, Saturn being in the first house, I see it all the time. And I feel like I came across it quite a lot growing up, especially when I was dating, right? Is that when you're someone who is like an empath, like you're someone who feels energies and you are very attached to the spirit that you recognize, the soul that you recognize in that person. You guys will know what I'm talking about. But the external person of what you see, and I'm talking about Saturn in the first house on the receiving end. So I'm looking at you guys, right? And I'm like, your soul does not match the outer body. These are two separate people. I'm seeing your soul, but your body is in front of me. And this is where we see someone who really struggles throughout life in this lifetime. Because we're seeing someone who's had a very hard time in their life anyway, but don't realize that a lot of it can be linked to self-infliction. Because there is an internal battle that you guys face, which is yourself. And that's why I'm saying it takes you guys to do a lot of soul searching to understand who you are, why you're here, and what your journey is. But again, being lost in a system is notorious for you guys. Going to work all day, being very ambitious, which is great. But don't ever forget about the soul, because you guys deflect and forget about that all the time. So a lot of people in the receiving end who are empaths are confused because we love the soul, but physically what we see, it doesn't match. So we're watching you go through a lot of obstacles in life, even though there's a big potential of how great you could be. But that's your internal struggle that you guys have to face and you guys have to deal with. A lot of the time when Saturn sits here, we see someone who's very frightened, right? Very frightened of achieving their own personal goals. It's like it's like having a project. And the project is to, I don't know, let's say create a YouTube channel. For example, it's a project. And Saturn being in the first house, there can be a lot of your own personal fears. You know, how are people gonna, what are people gonna think about me? You know, can I even commit myself to doing this on a weekly basis? All of these questions that Saturn in the first house question themselves with can be enough to prolong the experience or prolong the project. And that's why I'm saying there's always this, I'm working on being a better me, I'm working on this, I'm working on that, because there's always a project that they have that just takes them forever to complete all the flipping time. And when you think about Aries people in general, or Aries energy, you know, Aries is very much about being very direct, you know, very personalizing our goals. Like as an Aries, I motivate myself, you know, I am my own competition. If I want to achieve something, I'm gonna make sure that I do it this way, that way, and reach it by next week. And do you see, like it's about me, right? Whereas when you're looking at Saturn being in the first house, even in Aries, it takes a long time for you to overcome the first hurdle. And it's not that these people don't take it seriously, because you guys take it so seriously, but it just takes time. And you want to make sure that you are able to persevere through all of these steps. And you know what? It's also linked to the self-control of Saturn. You know, Saturn likes to control things. I want to control how I apply myself to these goals. I read for a guy, this was years ago, but I looked at his chart and I was like, he's got a very privileged chart. Like he has a lot of money. a lot of good friends with money, networks. Like his chart was very, very money driven. And he had Saturn placed in his first house, right? And what I saw was someone who took his personal goals so seriously. And although he would restrict himself out of fear, it's almost like, okay, I'm restricting myself, but I'm also going to take responsibility of my own restrictions. Okay, last week I didn't take that risk and invest my money into this company, the stock market, but this week, if I see something go up, I'm going to make sure that I put my money into that area, into that company. I'm going to make sure that I do this. And of course, it's about flourishing. And it just takes a long time to grow. And this is the thing, when Saturn is transiting through the ascendant or Saturn is returning, right? Especially the return, this is where we're seeing you taking yourself more seriously. So, okay, I have these personal goals, which could literally be, I want to lose 20 pounds. So with me doing that, I may not tell everyone around me and, have everyone gas me up, but no, I'm going to do it how I want to do it. I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to work out every day. I'm going to eat very low carb meals, healthy meals. I'm going to take it very, very seriously because Saturn likes to be in control of its body here. And we find that this kind of person can have a hard time gaining weight as well. But there's now more of a focus on being more in control of the body when Saturn comes into the first house. But you see, some people might just have a diet, and just not choose to eat, fatty meals or fried food. No. When Saturn comes through here, these people take it to a next level. They download apps, they use food diaries, they count the carbs. They take it to a next level. Because again, it's about being in control, taking serious this own personal goal that they have. Let's say another thing as well is, your appearance in terms of how you might choose to present yourself. And a lot of people get braces. They might have gaps in their teeth and think, this is not presentable. The first thing people see is teeth. Let me get some braces. Let me cut my hair a bit shorter. Let me just, shave it off, or let me just start over. Like, there's a lot to do with, I want people to take me more seriously. So I'm going to change my physical appearance because this is my life and I'm going to be in charge of how I want people to see me. And essentially, this is about discipline. You guys becoming a lot more disciplined once Saturn comes through the first house. And what's interesting as well, one thing that I found is that Saturn's coming from the 12th house and he comes into the first house, and the 12th house is opposing the 6th house, which can link you to looking after somebody else the year before or a couple of years beforehand. And sometimes when it comes into the first house is that there can be a health issue that comes up. And I found this to be more common in my clients who are a little bit older when they go through their Saturn return in their 50s. Or if someone's dealing with really bad health issues when they're very young, by the time their Saturn return comes in their late 20s, their health can become a hindrance. So remember, think about your physical body, how you maneuver. And Saturn comes in here and it's like, you ain't gonna maneuver so easily now. And sometimes some people, like one of my clients, she was diagnosed with MS. And she had Saturn just crossing over her ascendant as she got diagnosed. So there can be some health implications that come up when it comes to your Saturn return, and maybe even the transit as well, which can prevent your ability to maneuver. And also something that people can physically see by looking at you, by how you're maneuvering. And even if it's not exactly like a severe health issue like that, Saturn returning, Saturn transit, we're asking you to, start taking your health a bit more seriously, or your fitness or your body, to avoid getting ill. And because Saturn is associated with Capricorn, it's very earthly and it's all about reality. And when you have Saturn transiting through your first house, you've got to look at the past, you've got to look at your previous life choices, how you've treated people, what things you've done to people, how you have presented yourself. Because now Saturn's returning or transiting through the first house. This is where we see you possibly having a problem. This is where we see authoritative figures now getting involved. Karma, you know. I've seen people who have been abusive to other people, and as their Saturn return has approached, now they end up in jail, you know, because of what they've previously done. And they're now experiencing the karma of Saturn because of the life choices that they had made. You know, when you have Saturn placed there, you are always going to be under the thumb of the law. And you guys have to be very careful about what you are doing. And if Saturn has just come into your first house, I look at the 12th house as the house of endings and also new beginnings. And with Saturn now coming into your 12th house, it's a great time to create a new project that may fix or amend whatever you may have lost through the 12th house transits. Sometimes it can be in terms of you may have lost an authoritative figure, a grandparent. You might have lost a job. You know, you might have lost your home, like literally anything. And it's about, okay, my personal project now. Okay, I've lost my home. I'm going to put myself in a position to buy now, or I'm going to save money to buy a new house, or my grandparents died. I've now got to be more of an adult, you know, for my parents, prove to my parents that, you know, they haven't got to be so stressed out about me anymore. I'm going to make better life choices now because I feel a sense of guilt even, you know, for my grandparents passing away. So now I want to just be more responsible of my own life. So you see what I mean? So there's a lot of personal goals that you have that may also derive from the transit through that 12th house. I know what I'd like to see you guys do. I'd like to see you do a lot more soul searching, you know. A lot of you guys know I'm very big on psychology. And sometimes when Saturn sits here, there can be a restriction to understanding the soul of the body. And through soul searching, it's a personal achievement. You're looking for something, looking to appease the soul. And that can be through traveling. That can be through meeting open-minded or spiritual people. That can be through doing anything that might come to mind for you guys. But when Saturn sits here, you've got to take the soul so much more seriously and learn so much more about exploring your own sense of self. Like, this is a journey through self-discovery. Okay? All right, people, that is my video. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I will see you guys next week. Bye.